The way you speak in meetings is either building your reputation as a leader or it's slowly burying you. The people who get promoted aren't necessarily the ones with the best ideas in the room. They're the ones who communicate those ideas in a way that makes senior leaders sit up and pay attention. And after spending 20 years in senior leadership meetings, I've seen this pattern play out thousands of times. So in this video, I'm going to show you the 2 communication tactics that will change how you're perceived in every meeting you attend, so you can stop being the person who contributes and start being the person who leads. So here's what I see all the time with senior professionals. They're smart, they're experienced, they know their subject inside and out, and they walk into meetings and they share their thoughtful ideas and they give detailed answers to questions. And they leave thinking, that went pretty well. But then the promotion goes to someone else, or the leadership team passes them by and asks for someone else's opinion instead of theirs. And they're sitting there thinking, hang on, I said exactly the right thing. What am I missing? Well, I'll tell you what's happening. You're communicating like an expert. And at senior levels, that won't actually get you anywhere. Early in your career, being an expert is what gets you promoted. You know the details, you can answer any questions, you're reliable, thorough, and technically excellent. And that's how you got to where you are today. But at senior levels, the rules change completely. The people making promotion decisions aren't listening for who knows the most. They're listening for who thinks like a leader, who can simplify complex ideas, who can take charge and move a room forward. So let me show you the 2 tactics that made the difference. These are the 2 communication tactics that separate the people who get promoted from the people who stay stuck. The first is about when you speak, and the second is about how you speak. And when you combine them, you fundamentally change how you're perceived. So the first tactic is about strategic silence. Most people think that to be visible in meetings, you need to speak more. You need to get your points in. You need to make sure that people hear you. But the most powerful communicators I've ever worked with, they do the opposite. They speak less, but when they speak, the room stops. Strategic silence means resisting the urge to respond immediately. It means not jumping in with your view the moment that there's a gap. And it means letting others go first, listening to where the conversation is heading, and then choosing when to contribute for maximum impact. In your next meeting, try this. Don't be the first person to speak on any topic. Let 2 or 3 people go first and listen to what's being said. But more importantly, listen to what's not being said. What's the real tension in the room? What's the question that nobody's asking? What's the decision that everyone's kind of dancing around? And then when you speak, you're not adding another opinion to the pile, you're reframing the conversation. And the reason this works is that in any meeting, the person who speaks last often has the most influence. Because they've heard everyone else, they can synthesize, they can elevate. And psychologically, recency bias means that their contribution is the one that people remember when they leave the room. So think about it, when you come out of a meeting and someone asks, who had the best points, or what was that meeting about, it's almost always the person who cut through the noise near the end. So the mistake that people make with strategic silence is confusing it with being passive. This isn't about sitting there quietly because you're afraid to contribute. This is active listening with intent. You're choosing your moment deliberately, so it should feel like restraint, not retreat. Now, strategic silence solves the when, but knowing when to speak is only half the battle, because when you do speak, when you've chosen your moment, what you say needs to land with precision. So tactic 2 is the 3-sentence rule. So here's what happens to most senior professionals when they do speak in meetings. Someone asks a question, and instead of giving a direct answer, they give the full context, the background, the analysis, the caveats. You essentially take the room on the entire journey you went on to arrive at your conclusion. And you do this because you're thorough, because you want to be credible. But here's why it kills you at senior levels. Because decision makers don't want the journey. They want the destination. And when you over-explain, 3 things happen. The first is that you lose the room. People just start switching off because you're giving them more information than they need. The second is that you actually dilute your own point. The brilliant insight gets buried in your context. And third, and this is the killer, you sound like you're justifying your position rather than leading with it. So here's the rule. When you're speaking in a meeting, your default should be 3 sentences maximum. Sentence 1 is to frame the problem. Sentence 2 is to name the contribution that you're making, and sentence 3 is to state the decision. That's it, then you stop. If they want more detail, they'll ask. Now, each of these 3 sentences is doing something very specific, so let me break down exactly what goes into each one. So sentence 1, remember, is all about framing the problem. So most people in meetings jump straight to their recommendation. I think we should do X. And the room either agrees or disagrees, or you end up in a debate about solutions. But here's what the best communicators do differently. Before they give their view, they frame the problem. They say something like, the real question here is, or the way I see it, we're choosing between, Or, before we decide, let me name what I think is actually at stake here. This does something powerful. It positions you as the person shaping the discussion, not just participating in it. I had a client in consulting. He started leading every contribution with a framing sentence like this. And within 6 months, his managing partner began deferring to him in client meetings, not because he was the most senior person in the room, but because he was consistently the one making sense of this complexity for everyone else. So your first sentence frames the problem. Now here's where most people fall down, because they follow a great framing sentence with something vague. But the second sentence is where you make your contribution impossible to ignore. So sentence 2 is all about naming your contribution. And this is the part that makes most people deeply uncomfortable. You probably do a lot of great work behind the scenes. You lead the analysis, you pull the team together, you solve the problem. And then when it comes to the meeting, you present it as the team did this or we found that. And you think you're being a good leader by sharing credit. But here's what's actually happening. Nobody knows that it was you. I'm not talking about being arrogant or stealing credit from your colleagues. I'm talking about making your specific contribution visible in one sentence. There's a subtle but critical difference between we looked at the data and found some issues, and I led the analysis across 3 markets, and the pattern that emerged was X. One makes you invisible, the other makes your contribution and your thinking crystal clear. And at senior levels, the people deciding your promotion aren't watching your work day to day. They're forming impressions in meetings, in emails, in brief interactions. And if you don't name your contributions clearly, they literally don't know what it is that you've done. The skill is in naming your specific role naturally. Say something like, when I reviewed the client data, the pattern I identified was, or I pulled together the 3 work streams and what became clear was. Remember, this isn't boasting, it's just giving people clarity on what you've actually done. Okay, so you've framed the problem and you've named what you specifically bring to the table. Now here's where most people fall down. They add more detail, more caveats and more explanation. Don't do that. Your third sentence needs to do just one thing only. Sentence 3 is all about the decision that needs to be made. So in most meetings, there's a decision to be made. But it's really common for the conversation to fill up with updates and context and analysis, people's opinions, people going off on tangents. So the person who cuts through all of that and drives towards a decision, that person is leading the room. And naming what your contribution, your evidence, what you've done, you're going to close with a clear recommendation. So putting all 3 sentences together, you'll start with a framing, so something like, the real question is whether we prioritize short-term cost efficiency or long-term capability. Then you're going to state your contribution. So I reviewed the 3 options and the data strongly supports investing now. And then this third sentence is, my recommendation is that we go with option 2. I'm happy to walk through the trade-offs if that's helpful. You frame the problem, you've shown your thinking, and you've made a recommendation. Done. Every time you speak in a meeting, ask yourself, am I moving this conversation towards a decision? Or am I just adding more unnecessary information? Because at senior levels, the ability to move things forward is the single most valued skill. Leaders don't just think well, they help people to decide well. I had a client, a director at a global bank, and she actually timed herself in meetings for a couple of weeks. And she was pretty horrified to discover that her average response to a question was over 2 minutes long. 2 minutes. In a room full of senior leaders, that is an eternity. So instead of walking the room through her full analysis, she'd say something like, the core risk here is our exposure in the Asian markets. My review of the last quarter shows that we're significantly overweight relative to our mandate, so I'd recommend that we rebalance this quarter, and I've got the proposed allocation ready. 3 sentences, clear, decisive, and with a specific point of view. Her contributions started getting picked up and built on by the leadership team rather than just being acknowledged and kind of moved past. And she told me it was the first time she felt that she was genuinely shaping the direction of those meetings rather than just contributing to them. Now, here's how these 2 tactics connect. Strategic silence tells you when to speak. Wait, listen, choose your moment. And the 3-sentence rule tells you how to speak when that moment comes. You frame, you contribute, and you decide. And together they transform you from someone who participates in meetings to someone who's leading in them. You might be thinking, this all sounds great, but I'm not naturally a concise communicator. I process things by talking through them. And I hear you. And honestly, that was me too. It still is a little bit sometimes. Concise communication isn't a personality trait, it's a skill. And like any skill, it can be practiced. So start with one meeting this week where you consciously apply just a 3-sentence rule, and you'll be surprised how quickly it becomes natural for you. Or maybe you're thinking, my company doesn't really reward this kind of thing. It's all about politics. Now look, I won't pretend that office politics don't exist, but I will say this. In every organization I've worked in or studied, the professionals who communicate with strategic clarity rise faster. Not because they're playing politics, but because they look like leaders before they have the title. And that's what makes decision makers confident in promoting them. The real question isn't whether these tactics are going to work for you. It's what happens if you keep doing what you're doing now. Because if you don't change how you communicate, nothing is going to change in how you're being perceived. Now, if you want to start showing up in meetings as someone who's clearly ready for the next level, these 2 tactics will make an immediate difference for you. But they won't create lasting career change unless you first got clarity on what you actually want your next move to be. Because speaking like a leader is powerful, but speaking like a leader who knows exactly where they're heading is unstoppable. So watch this video next, where I reveal the step-by-step framework for getting complete clarity on your next career chapter, particularly if you've been successful but are feeling a little bit stuck, so that you can combine strategic communication with a clear direction that excites you. I'll see you there.